The Sherlock Holmes Advent Calendar. An Odyssey Through Jerusalem by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Nora Godwin. Narrated by Peter Silverleaf. 24. The Ring. When I put my pistol away, the members of the Zealot Popular Front breathed a sigh of relief. I could not surrender them to the questionable violence of the Ottoman state power. "You heard, Dr. Watson," Holmes said. "We must leave the house and Bethlehem immediately." "But where should we go?" asked Salah. "People will look for us everywhere, and certainly our families will be questioned. It's hopeless." "We're going down fighting," Aaron announced with playful self-confidence. "We are retreating to Hebron and coming back in the ranks of our fighters." Habash shook his head. "My young friend," he replied, "I am afraid the fight is over before it has begun. We cannot risk that in the meantime the Ashkenazi settlement or Bethlehem will be razed to the ground, nor can we accept that Salah's family will be harmed. We must surrender and trust in God's protection." "Trust me," Holmes urged those present. "There is no reason for an unconditional surrender, but also no prospect of a fight. So we need a third solution, and I will bring it about. You just have to do what I tell you." In the absence of alternatives, the conspirators agreed. Salah, Aaron, and Habash went further south to Hebron, where they were to wait for news. Holmes and I, meanwhile, returned to Jerusalem with Natalia and Lawrence. When we arrived at the Zion Gate on the morning of December 24, a complete curfew had been imposed on the city. The heavily armed contingents of Turkish soldiers had been massively increased and were present everywhere. Under these conditions, a successful uprising would never be able to take place here. Natalia and Lawrence were allowed into the city as members of the diplomatic corps without much question, while Holmes and I, as allied investigators, were also given unhindered access. I accompanied the British envoy to the Anglican mission at Christ Church to check on Salah's children, while Holmes obtained an audience with the Ottoman governor. It took over 3 hours for us to meet again. I was surprised but also relieved when Holmes appeared with Mirjam on his side, who had apparently been released. Overjoyed, she embraced her children again. "It's over," announced Holmes, who seemed exhausted. "After consultation with the Sublime Porte, the Mutsarif has agreed to withdraw the army and start negotiations. They are ready to discuss the Palestinian autonomy, and the well-known members of the Zealot Popular Front will be granted amnesty. Reason has triumphed." "Reason?" I repeated skeptically. "Say, Holmes, how did you do that?" My friend smiled contentedly and said, "Ibrahim Haki is not a stupid man. He knows what it is to be lost here, and he knows that Jerusalem cannot be ruled by the sword. In this respect, he was soon open to a peaceful solution." "That's all?" I asked. Holmes hesitated for a moment, then added, "Well, maybe I also told him that otherwise, in the Negev desert, an army of hundreds of thousands of well-armed insurgents would be ready to attack Jerusalem, to which the Ottoman troops could easily succumb. Certainly an exaggeration, but it worked." "An exaggeration?" I said. "Rather a shameless lie, because the Zealots do not even have a fraction of this number." Holmes lifted his shoulders. "The governor doesn't know that, and he never has to know." "You blackmailed him with a threat," I noted. "But no," Holmes disagreed. "I just sketched out a possible scenario and gave him some advice. Not any more." "What advice?" I asked. "A counsel on how to deal with Jerusalem," Holmes began. "I told the Ottoman governor a story about the great Muslim commander Saladin, who ruled the city in the 12th century after defeating the Crusaders. One day Saladin had the Jewish citizen Nathan, praised for his wisdom, come to him to ask him an important question. Which of the 3 major monotheistic religions is the right one? Judaism, Christianity, or Islam? Nathan responded with a parable in the form of another story. A father owns a precious ring, a family heirloom that has always been passed on for generations to the son the father loved the most. But in the end, this decision stands before a man who loves his 3 sons equally. He does not want to favor anyone or offend anyone. Therefore, he has 2 duplicates made and gives each of the 3 sons a ring, each with the claim that it is the real one. After the death of the father, the sons go to court to settle the obvious dispute over the authenticity of the rings. However, the judge does not get involved. He states that it is no longer possible to determine which ring or whether one of them is the real one, and he adds that this does not matter either. In the end, all rings come from the father who loved all of his sons the same way. It would not now be up to the sons, and indeed to all, to become worthy ring-bearers, just pleasing to God and tolerant. In this way, Nathan did not give an answer, but Sultan Saladin was, of course, able to interpret the story accordingly. All believers of the three Abrahamic religions are children of God, and in their respective ways equally pleasing to God. Accordingly, Saladin established his further rule. When Holmes had finished, I realized, I have already heard this story. It is also told in a German play. You convinced the Ottoman governor with the help of a poet of the German Enlightenment? My friend replied, Well, it was probably not Mr. Lessing who convinced the Mutsarif, but rather the reference to the great Saladin. He is regarded by Muslims not only as an important conqueror and ruler, but also as wise and just. Who would want to stand up to Saladin? I had to laugh briefly, but quickly became serious again. And you think, I continued, that the Ottomans will now make a lasting effort for tolerance, that there will be an equal and respectful coexistence in Palestine of Jews, Christians and Muslims, of Arabs, Turks and Armenians? Holmes pondered briefly, only to reply, This area has always been disputed. When the Hebrews arrived here, they forcibly subdued the Canaanites. This was followed by the Hittites, Egyptians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Macedonians, Parthians, Romans, Seljuks, Arabs, Crusaders, and Turks, and who knows whoever else will aim to take possession of this land in the future. I am not sure if tolerance will be established so quickly, but I think peaceful coexistence is a start. But at least the Ottomans indirectly ensured, I stated, that at least Muslim Arabs, Christians, and Jews have joined forces. Political alliances are not for eternity, Holmes said. Alliances will break and new ones will form. There will always be supposed enemies. Surely you can bear another metaphor from Germany, can't you? Goethe, Schiller, Kant, Hegel? I asked expectantly. Holmes shook his head. It's about a game, he explained, which is often played at weddings or other social celebrations. A certain number of chairs are placed in a circle, music sounds during which the players walk around the chairs. At an arbitrary time the music breaks off and the players have to quickly sit on one of the chairs. However, there are not enough chairs for everyone. One player will be left over not finding a seat. He retires. In the next round, the number of chairs is again reduced by one and everything is repeated. In the end, two players fight for the last chair. I know the game, I claimed. It's called the musical chairs. Not in Germany, Holmes disagreed. There it is called The Journey to Jerusalem. I knew what Holmes was getting at. Any religious or ethnic group in Palestine would always be discriminated against, excluded or oppressed, or at least have this impression. A real and lasting peace requires that all denominations and peoples be given enough space. No one may be oppressed in the city of peace, and in the entire Holy Land. In the late afternoon of December 24th, Holmes and I left Jerusalem. We took the train to Jaffa, where we would board a ship that would take us back to Europe. There was only one thing left to do on the train journey. We've waited long enough, I said. Now you're finally opening it? Holmes made a confused face and asked, What should I open? Don't fool me, I replied. I'm talking about the letter you received from Mycroft, with the hint that you shouldn't read it until December 24th. Oh, the letter, Holmes said, waving it off. I threw it away. Threw it away? I repeated. Why is that? Didn't you want to know what it says? I know what it says, Holmes assured. How? I checked. My friend shook his head and openly declared, Well, what do you think? Because I read it, of course. I'm not a clairvoyant. And not a good colleague either, I added. When did you read the letter? Yesterday, Holmes replied calmly. You weren't allowed to do that, I protested. The instructions were clear. Holmes smiled. Believe me, Watson, we've done far worse to Mycroft than just flouting his reading rules. You did, I corrected. So tell me, what was the content of this letter? It must be of increased importance. What did Mycroft tell you? Holmes looked at me good-naturedly and claimed, You don't want to know that. It's better that way. I can probably decide for myself, I growled. You treat me like a child. I demand to know immediately what was in the letter. My energizing friend thought for a few seconds, then he said, Well, all right. I will present you with 2 different variants of the possible content, and you can then decide for yourself what the truth is. I frowned at this ridiculous game, but agreed. Okay, if it makes you happy. Variant 1, Holmes began. In the letter, Mycroft urges us to leave Jerusalem and Palestine immediately. He warns us that a military uprising against Ottoman rule would begin on December 25. A war would be imminent. For our own safety, we should leave so as not to get caught between the fronts. It seems to me that there are clairvoyants in your family, I interjected. But Holmes added, That's not all. Mycroft also states that he did not tell us the whole truth about our mission. Actually, he even sent us to Palestine under the wrong conditions. In reality, in addition to the Russians, the British are the secret supporters of the Zealot Popular Front. In fact, the British government is pursuing a destabilization of Ottoman rule. It provided the Zealots with money, knowledge, and weapons. That doesn't make sense at all, I said. Why, then, were we sent here as alleged allies of the Ottomans? We had the task of rendering the Zealots harmless and thwarting an uprising. That's right, Holmes confirmed. Mycroft also apologizes for abusing us in this letter. We were the most prominent and unsuspicious fig leaf that was supposed to conceal the true intentions of the British government. More than that, our presence should loan the Ottomans to safety, including 1 or 2 investigative successes in Jerusalem, such as the arrest of the brothers Jacob and Simon Geiger. Meanwhile, the Zealots, the Russians, and the British would have a free hand to prepare the real uprising outside the city. But before this should begin, namely tomorrow, we would have to leave. Hence the enlightening letter. A perfidious plan, I stated, in which we are intended only as puppets, much like your brother. Nevertheless, it did not work, but ultimately turning our mission into a peace mission, we have thwarted the plans of the British government. Do you really think so? Asked Holmes. We have persuaded the Ottomans to negotiate and are once again weighing them in safety. The plans for an Arab uprising against the Ottomans are probably only postponed. What do you think Mr. Lawrence is actually doing in Damascus? Perhaps the uprising will begin in Syria, and all of Palestine has been just a diversionary maneuver. It doesn't have to be tomorrow, but maybe in a few months or in a few years. Enough of that, Holmes, I replied. I don't like this variant. What's the other? My friend looked at me mischievously and said, Variant 2. The letter is harmless. Mycroft just wishes us a Merry Christmas and a happy journey home. Well, my dear Watson, choose. I didn't have to think twice. I opt for the second option, I replied tiredly, because I urgently need relaxing and carefree holidays now. Merry Christmas, Holmes.